Late afternoon, when the sky turned gold above the pine trees, a German shepherd walked alone to the same empty road outside town. No cars passed there anymore. No homes waited at the end. Only wet asphalt, a broken bridge, and the fading sunlight stretching across a place everyone else had forgotten. People said the old dog was confused. But why did he always arrive before the sun disappeared? Why did he sit in the middle of that road, staring toward the woods as if someone might still come back? And why did a lonely former Navy SEAL, a man still carrying ghosts from the lives he couldn't save, become the only one the dog allowed to follow? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Late afternoon settled over the small Montana town with the tired grace of an old woman lowering herself into a wooden chair. The sky was still bright, but the sun had begun its slow descent behind the dark pine ridges, leaving streaks of honey-colored light across the lake and the empty two-lane road that curved past the last row of houses. A thin autumn wind moved through the town, cool enough to make people pull their coats closer, but not cold enough to keep them indoors. In a place like Grapeen, people noticed everything. They noticed whose mailbox had not been opened, whose truck had sat too long in the driveway, whose porch light burned through the night. And for the past several weeks, people had noticed the old German shepherd. The dog appeared every morning near the center of town, usually around the bakery, sometimes behind Martha Bell's diner, and once, to the great scandal of the church ladies, sleeping directly beneath the sign that said, "No loitering." He was a large black and tan German shepherd, broad through the chest, though age had lowered his hips and silvered the fur around his muzzle. One ear stood sharp and alert, while the other bent slightly at the tip, giving him the look of a soldier who had seen too many wars but still refused to retire properly. His amber eyes were what people remembered most. They were not wild. They were not empty. They were steady, watchful, and almost painfully human. The town called him Ranger, though nobody said the name casually. It belonged to him, the way an old medal belonged in a drawer, worn, meaningful, and heavier than it looked. Noah Carter noticed Ranger before Ranger noticed him. Noah was 55, though some mornings his knees argued for 70, and his pride argued for 30. He had once been a Navy SEAL, a title people in Grapevine whispered with admiration whenever they believed he was too far away to hear. He was tall, still powerful through the shoulders, with a square jaw roughened by gray stubble and deep lines carved around his storm-colored eyes. His hair was dark brown, gone silver at the temples, clipped short out of habit rather than vanity. He walked like a man who measured exits without thinking, sat with his back to walls, and flinched at sounds he hated himself for hearing. War had not followed Noah home with banners and drums. It had slipped into his bones quietly, like winter under a door. He lived alone in a cedar cabin near the lake, where the mornings smelled of wet wood, and the evenings were so quiet they sometimes felt accusatory. Most people believed Noah preferred solitude. That was only half true. Solitude did not ask questions. Solitude did not look wounded when he failed to answer. Solitude never said, "You seem different since you came back," as if coming back were something a man did all at once. So Noah let the town believe what it wanted. He bought coffee at Martha's diner, repaired his own truck, chopped his own firewood, and spoke only when silence became impolite. Martha Bell, however, had declared war on his silence years ago. She owned the only diner in Grapeen, a narrow brick building with a red door, fogged windows, and a bell over the entrance that sounded cheerful even when nobody inside felt that way. Martha was 72, short and round, with curly white hair pinned back by whatever pencil she had misplaced that morning. Her cheeks were pink from years of standing near hot griddles, and her blue eyes had the dangerous softness of a woman who could comfort you while also telling you exactly when you were being foolish. She had lost her husband to a logging accident 20 years earlier, and after that, she had developed the habit of feeding anything that looked lonely: stray cats, widowers, runaway teenagers, and, most recently, Ranger. That afternoon, Noah sat at the far booth near the window, turning a chipped white coffee mug between both hands. He had ordered the same thing he always ordered, black coffee and toast he rarely finished. Outside, Ranger crossed the street with slow, purposeful steps. The dog did not sniff trash cans. He did not beg. He did not chase the little birds hopping near the curb, though one of them looked rude enough to deserve it. He simply walked past the diner, as if following an appointment only he remembered. Martha came up beside Noah's booth and watched through the glass. "There he goes again," she said. Noah did not turn his head. "Dogs got a routine." "So do you," Martha replied. "His is more interesting." Noah grunted, which Martha accepted as a full paragraph from him. The old woman wiped her hands on her apron, though they were already clean. "That dog used to belong to the Hale family." Noah's fingers stilled around the mug. He had heard the name before, but only in the way small towns preserved tragedy, half in memory, half in warning. "Hale?" "Thomas Hale and his little girl," Martha said, her voice lowering. "Emma, sweet child, brown hair, always tangled, missing one front tooth for almost a year because she refused to let it grow back on schedule, or so she told me." A sad smile touched Martha's mouth. "Thomas was a good man once. Not perfect. No man is, except maybe in his own obituary. But he loved that girl." Noah looked out at Ranger again. The German Shepherd had reached the edge of town, where the sidewalk gave way to gravel and the road bent toward the pines. "What happened?" Noah asked, though something in Martha's face told him the answer would not be gentle. "Flood year," she said. 13 years ago. Thomas drove out during a storm. Some said he'd been drinking. Some said he was leaving town. Some said he was just trying to outrun grief, which is foolish, because grief has better legs than any of us. She folded her arms over her apron. "Car vanished near the old bridge. Bridge came down that same night. They never found Thomas. Never found Emma either." Noah stared at the road beyond the window. "But the dog came back." 3 weeks later, Martha said. "Thin as a broom handle. Paw pads torn raw. Mud up to his ribs. Wouldn't let anyone touch him except old Sheriff Donnelly. And even then, only long enough to pull burrs out of his coat. Folks tried taking him in after that. The Miller boys built him a proper doghouse. Miss Clara tried keeping him in her fenced yard. I even let him sleep in the diner kitchen once." She gave a dry little laugh. "He ate half a ham, insulted my cat with his face, and left before sunrise." Noah almost smiled despite himself. It came and went quickly, like a match struck in wind. Martha's expression softened. Every time he went back to that road, Noah finally looked at her. "Why? That's the question, isn't it?" Martha said. Then, after a pause, she added, with a half shrug, "There are some promises only dogs are loyal enough to keep." The words stayed with Noah longer than he wanted them to. He left the diner before sunset, paid in cash as always, and told himself he was only driving the same direction because it was the way home. That was a lie, but Noah had survived worse lies than that. He kept his truck a careful distance behind Ranger as the dog moved beyond the last mailbox, past the shuttered gas station, past a field of dead yellow grass bending under the wind. The town disappeared behind him, replaced by pines and the low murmur of the lake somewhere through the trees. The road narrowed after a mile. Cracks split the asphalt like old scars. Weeds pushed through the shoulders. A rusted sign leaned to one side, warning that the bridge ahead was closed. Though the bridge had not merely closed, it had surrendered. Noah parked beside a stand of fir trees and watched Ranger continue alone. The German Shepherd reached the broken stretch of road just before the old bridge site. The far end of the bridge was gone, leaving only jagged concrete supports and twisted metal beams reaching over the river like bones from some drowned giant. Below, the water ran dark and restless. Beyond it, the forest thickened into shadow. Ranger did not bark. He did not pace. He lowered himself carefully onto the middle of the road, his old joints stiff, his tail curling close to his body. Then he faced the ruined bridge and waited. Noah stood beside his truck, one hand resting on the door. The sight should not have affected him as much as it did. A dog, lying in a road, was just a dog lying in a road. But Ranger's stillness had weight. It was not confusion. It was not habit. It was vigil. Noah knew something about vigils. He had kept them beside hospital beds, beside flag-draped coffins, beside radios that had gone silent at the wrong time. He knew the cruel little bargains the mind made with absence. Wait long enough, and maybe the door opens. Listen hard enough, and maybe the voice returns. Stay awake, and maybe the dead do not have to be dead yet. A gust of wind moved across the road. Ranger lifted his head. His ears sharpened toward the forest beyond the broken bridge. Noah felt the back of his neck tighten. Nothing moved. No person stepped from the trees. No voice called across the river. Only leaves scraped the asphalt in small, nervous circles. "Come on, old boy," Noah muttered, though he was too far away for the dog to hear. "Nothing's out there." Ranger remained where he was until the sun slipped lower and the gold light began to cool. Only then did the dog rise, slow and reluctant, and begin the walk back toward town. As he passed Noah's truck, he glanced once at the man, not pleading, not friendly, just aware. Then he continued into the dusk. Noah drove home with the heater off, though the air had grown cold. He told himself not to get involved. A broken dog, a dead family, a road nobody used. That was the kind of story a man could drown in if he stood too close. He had spent years building distance between himself and sorrow. It was not noble, but it functioned. Most days, functioning was the best he could offer. That night, rain came hard over the lake. It struck Noah's cabin roof in waves and filled the dark windows with silver streaks. He woke from a dream he could not fully remember, only the sensation of shouting and mud and hands slipping from his grip. His breath came sharp. His shirt clung damp against his back. For a moment he was not in Montana. He was nowhere safe. Then, something outside barked once. Noah sat upright. The bark came again, distant but urgent. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the rain. The world beyond the porch was black and shining. Water ran down the steps. Wind bent the trees. Far down the lakeside road, almost swallowed by darkness, a shape moved. Ranger. Noah got into his truck before he could talk himself out of it. He followed the dog through the storm, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. The farther they drove from town, the more the road seemed to vanish under water and shadow. When they reached the broken bridge, Noah stopped hard. Ranger stood in the middle of the empty road. Rain streamed over his black and tan coat. His body was rigid, every muscle alive with attention. His ears were pointed toward the forest beyond the collapsed bridge. Noah opened the truck door. "Ranger." The dog did not look back. For one suspended second, the old German shepherd stood there like a statue carved from grief and lightning. Then his head tilted, as if he had heard something no human ear could catch. And suddenly, Ranger ran straight into the darkness. Ranger vanished beyond the broken edge of the road, as if the storm had opened a door only he could see. Noah stood in the rain for half a breath, one boot in the mud, one hand still gripping the truck door, and felt an old, hated instinct rise through him. Follow. Move. Do not lose sight. The river below the ruined bridge roared black and swollen, slamming against the concrete supports with a voice like distant artillery. Noah called Ranger's name once, then again, but the wind shredded the sound and flung it into the pines. The old German shepherd was already gone, swallowed by the trees beyond the collapsed span, and Noah knew better than to cross in the dark. The bridge had been dead for 13 years. A man who survived war did not survive by mistaking courage for stupidity. Though he had known several fine young men who tried, he stood there until the rain ran down his collar and into his shirt, until his fingers went numb, until the woods gave him nothing back but darkness. When Noah finally returned to his cabin, he did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with a towel around his shoulders and an old revolver he never touched resting in the drawer beside him, not because he expected danger, but because memory had strange furniture and sometimes rearranged the room without asking. The storm hammered the windows. In the reflected glass, his own face looked older than he felt and younger than his guilt. The lines around his mouth had deepened over the years, carved by restraint more than age. He had once commanded men with a voice steady enough to cut through panic. Now, he struggled to say good morning to a waitress without sounding like he was giving testimony. Near dawn, the rain softened. Noah opened the front door and found Ranger lying beneath the porch roof, soaked, muddy, and breathing hard. The dog's black and tan coat clung to his old frame, making his ribs show more clearly than they had the day before. Burrs were caught in the feathering around his legs. His amber eyes lifted to Noah's face, tired but alert, and in them, Noah saw, not triumph, not fear, but frustration. The kind a person might feel after trying to explain a dream in a language nobody else spoke. "You look like trouble," Noah said quietly. Ranger gave a low huff, as if he had been called worse by better men. Noah surprised himself by kneeling. His knees complained, loudly and without dignity. "Don't start," he muttered to them, then reached toward the dog's coat. Ranger stiffened, but did not pull away. Noah removed the burrs one by one, careful around the old dog's sore paws. He found a shallow scrape along Ranger's left foreleg, cleaned it with warm water, and wrapped it badly with gauze from a first aid kit that had seen more use on machinery than living creatures. The bandage looked like something done by a man trying to gift wrap a fish, but Ranger allowed it. By morning, Noah drove back to town with the dog, asleep in the passenger footwell. It was the first time another heartbeat had ridden beside him in years. Martha Bell saw them through the diner window and came outside before Noah could pretend he had only stopped for coffee. Martha wore a green cardigan beneath her apron that made her look like a grandmother preparing for battle. Her white curls were pinned up with a fork this time, and her eyes narrowed the moment she saw Ranger's muddy coat. "Well," she said, hands on hips, "either you two joined a fishing club, or that old fool dragged you somewhere you had no business going." "Storm got bad," Noah said. "That is not an answer. That is weather." Ranger limped past her into the diner, as though he owned stock in the place. Martha sighed, opened the door wider, and said, "Fine. But if he eats ham again, I'm billing you." Inside, while Ranger lay near the radiator, Noah asked about the Hales. Martha did not answer right away. She poured him coffee. The man set down a plate of eggs he had not ordered. That was Martha's method of softening a difficult story. Butter, salt, and no permission. "Thomas Hale was not born broken," she said at last. "People forget that. They talk about the drinking, the shouting, the night of the flood. But before all that, he was the kind of father who carried hair ribbons in his coat pocket because Emma kept losing hers. Tall man, lean, with sandy brown hair and a mustache he thought made him look respectable. It made him look like a nervous school principal, if you ask me. He had gray eyes that went gentle whenever his daughter walked into a room. Noah listened without touching the eggs. His wife, Claire, was the center of that house, Martha continued. Small woman, dark hair, pretty in a quiet way, with skin that freckled in summer, and a laugh that could make a funeral director check if he'd missed a joke. Cancer took her slow, too slow. Thomas watched her disappear by inches, and something in him started disappearing too. Martha's voice thinned. After Claire died, he still loved Emma. Lord knows he did. But grief made him clumsy with that love. He drank to sleep, then drank because he'd slept too long, then drank because shame was waiting when he woke. Noah looked toward Ranger. The dog's eyes were open, fixed on Martha. "The night it happened?" Noah asked. Martha folded her arms, holding herself. Storm was coming down hard. Emma had been staying with Thomas's sister, but Thomas showed up, wanting to take her home. Some folks heard arguing. Emma didn't want to go. She was 8 years old, thin as a willow switch, big brown eyes, always trying to be brave before she knew what brave cost. Thomas was drunk enough to be stubborn and sober enough to hate himself for it. He put her in the truck anyway. Ranger jumped in after her. That dog never let the child out of his sight. Noah felt something tighten behind his ribs. They headed toward the old bridge, Martha said. River rose fast. Road washed out near the bend. By morning, the bridge was half gone, and the truck was gone with it. Search teams came for weeks. No truck, no bodies, just pieces. A child's red scarf near the riverbank. Thomas's boot caught in a root. And then, 3 weeks later, Ranger came back alone. The bell over the door rang before Noah could answer. A man stepped into the diner, tall but stooped, wearing a waxed canvas coat darkened by rain and a hunter's cap pulled low over a forehead mapped with wrinkles. His beard was white, uneven, and weather-stained at the edges from years of pipe smoke. One of his eyes was pale blue. The other was clouded with cataract, giving him a lopsided stare that made him look both suspicious and permanently disappointed. Martha glanced over. "Silas Boone," she said. "You smell like wet leaves and bad decisions." The old man grinned, showing several missing teeth. "Morning to you too, Martha." Silas Boone had lived in the hills longer than some roads had existed. He was a hunter, a trapper in his younger days, and the kind of man children invented stories about because he moved through the woods like he had been misplaced there at birth. He was not cruel, but he trusted trees more than people, and people had mostly returned the favor. He ordered coffee, then noticed Ranger by the radiator. His grin faded. "That dog still going out to Hale Road?" Silas asked. Noah turned. "You know something about that?" Silas studied him carefully. "You're Carter. SEAL fellow. Former. A man's former. A lot of things. Doesn't mean the thing's former in him." Silas took the coffee. Martha handed him and wrapped both hands around it. "I saw that dog after the flood." Martha stilled. "You told the sheriff. You saw him come out of the woods." "I told Sheriff Donnelly half of it," Silas said. "Other half sounded foolish, and I was younger then. Still had enough pride to care." Noah leaned forward. "What did you see?" Silas glanced at Ranger. 4 days after the bridge went, I was checking high ground for deer pushed by the flood. Rain had stopped, but the woods were still dripping like a leaky roof. I saw Ranger come out from the pines across the river. He was dragging something. Thought it was a rabbit at first. The old man's voice roughened. It was a child's shirt. Pink once, maybe. Torn near the shoulder, mud all over it. Martha's hand rose to her mouth. "Was there blood?" Noah asked. "A little," Silas said. "Not enough for what folks feared. More like someone scraped up bad and kept moving." He swallowed. "Dog tried to drag that shirt toward the road. He kept looking back into the trees, whining. Not how a dog acts when a thing is over. How a dog acts when he wants you to follow." Noah sat very still. Silas looked into his coffee. "I went a ways. Ground was soft. Tracks everywhere. From rain, deer, searchers, rescue men. Then thunder started again, and I lost the trail. I told myself the child was gone, same as everyone said. Easier that way." Ranger rose from the radiator, slow and stiff, and limped toward the door. He did not bark. He simply stood there, head lowered, waiting. Noah looked at Martha, then at Silas, then toward the gray morning beyond the diner glass. For 13 years, the town had believed the flood took Thomas and Emma Hale. For 13 years, Ranger had returned to the same empty road, not because he had forgotten, perhaps because everyone else had. Noah stood and reached for his coat. Martha's voice followed him, quieter now. "Noah, don't go turning ghosts into orders." He paused at the door, one hand on the handle, Ranger beside him like an old shadow. "Sometimes," Noah said, "ghosts are just the names we give to things we were too afraid to look for." Outside, the rain began again, soft and cold. Ranger stepped into it without hesitation, and for the first time, Noah wondered if Emma Hale had not vanished into the river at all. Maybe she had made it out of the truck that night. Maybe she had entered the woods alive. Morning came pale and damp over Grapevine, with low clouds hanging so close to the pine ridges that the mountains looked as if they were trying to hide their own faces. The rain had thinned into a mist, the kind that did not fall so much as linger, silvering the diner windows, softening the lake, and turning every old fence rail into a dark line of memory. Noah Carter drove toward Hale Road with Ranger in the back of his truck. The old German shepherd, standing despite the stiffness in his hips, nose lifted to the wet air as though the forest had begun speaking again. Noah had not slept more than an hour. Silas Boone's words had stayed with him through the night. Not how a dog acts when a thing is over. How a dog acts when he wants you to follow. There were sentences that did not knock politely. They entered a man's mind, sat down, and refused to leave. At the broken bridge, Noah parked near the leaning warning sign and stepped out into mud that sucked softly at his boots. Ranger jumped down before Noah could help him, landed badly on the wrapped foreleg, then pretended he had meant to do it exactly that way. Noah gave him a look. "Pride is a young dog's game," he said. Ranger sneezed, which Noah chose to interpret as disagreement. The ruined bridge stretched before them, half devoured by years and weather. Beyond the river, the old forest waited. Noah had studied the land after leaving Martha's diner. The bridge was impossible, but a narrow service path followed the river east for half a mile, where fallen stones and shallow water made crossing possible if a man did not mind wet boots and questionable judgment. Ranger knew the path. That unsettled Noah more than he liked. The dog moved with a steady certainty, not fast, not reckless, but with the grave patience of someone walking toward a churchyard. Noah followed, one hand occasionally brushing tree trunks for balance. The woods smelled of soaked bark, cold earth, and the faint iron scent of the swollen river. Twice, Ranger paused, head turning sharply toward sounds Noah could not separate from the wind. Once a squirrel dropped half a pine cone near Noah's shoulder, and he flinched hard enough to feel foolish. The squirrel chattered from above, like an elderly clerk filing a complaint. Noah muttered, "Keep your opinions to yourself," and for a moment, the absurdity of arguing with wildlife loosened the knot in his chest. They crossed where the river widened into a rocky bend. Water climbed over Noah's boots and bit cold into his socks. Ranger stepped carefully from stone to stone, old body tense, tail held low for balance. On the far bank, the forest changed. The trees grew thicker, older, their trunks dark with moss. The ground rose in uneven slopes where roots twisted like knuckles. Ranger led him away from the river, up through brush and fallen branches, until they found something that might once have been a trail. It was barely visible now, a depression in the earth lined by rotted leaves, but it had direction, purpose. Ranger followed it as if he had walked it yesterday. After 20 minutes, the dog stopped. Noah nearly bumped into him. "What is it?" Ranger stood at the edge of a clearing, choked by young saplings. He did not enter. He simply looked from Noah to the ground ahead, then back again. His ears angled forward. His body was rigid, but he did not bark. It felt less like warning and more like instruction. Noah moved past him slowly. The clearing looked ordinary at first. Wet leaves, fern beds, a few collapsed branches, the green-black remains of an old stump. Then he noticed the lines. A rectangle beneath the growth. Stones laid in a rough foundation, half buried, but too straight to be natural. Near the far edge, charred fragments of wood lay beneath moss, and a rusted hinge jutted from the soil like a broken tooth. Someone had built a cabin here. Not recently, not neatly, but it had existed. Noah crouched near the foundation and brushed aside leaves with gloved fingers. The earth beneath was compacted. He found a square of old tin, a shard of blue glass, and what looked like the rusted rim of a small stove. People had not merely passed through here. Someone had lived here long enough to leave the stubborn little evidence of survival. Ranger still would not enter the clearing. Noah turned. "You brought me here, but you won't come in?" The dog lowered his head slightly, eyes fixed on the foundation. Noah felt the silence gather around them. He thought of Emma Hale, 8 years old, thin as Martha had described her, frightened in a storm, running through these woods with rain in her eyes and Ranger at her side. He tried not to imagine it too clearly. Children in danger were a particular cruelty to men who had already failed to save enough people. He stood and scanned the trees. If Emma had come here, she had not built the cabin herself. Someone else had been here, someone old enough to make shelter, someone hidden from Graypeen, or hiding from it. A crack of brush behind him made Noah turn sharply. Ranger did not react with alarm, only lifted his nose. A small figure stood at the edge of the trees, wearing a yellow raincoat too large for her narrow shoulders and rubber boots decorated with faded purple stars. She was a girl of about 12, slight and pale, with straight chestnut hair cut just below her chin and large hazel eyes that seemed to take in more than she said. Freckles dotted her nose and cheeks. She clutched a small notebook to her chest, as if it were a shield. Noah frowned. "You shouldn't be out here," the girl swallowed. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Ranger, and the dog, who had refused to step into the clearing, walked toward her with astonishing gentleness. He lowered himself before her as though greeting a frightened bird. The girl's face changed. Not into a smile exactly, but into something less guarded. I followed," she said. The first word caught hard in her throat. Not close. Noah recognized her then. June Whitaker, the girl from the blue house 2 lots down from Martha's diner. He had seen her on her grandmother's porch, always reading, always watching, rarely joining the other children near the schoolyard. June had a stutter that seemed worse when adults rushed her, and Graypeen, for all its kindness, was still a town where people often mistook quiet children for strange ones. She was being raised by her grandmother, Lottie Whitaker, a thin, sharp-faced widow with silver braids and the fierce posture of a woman who had survived poverty by refusing to bend. Noah knew that much because Martha knew everything and distributed information with coffee. "You followed us across the river?" Noah asked. June nodded once, then looked embarrassed. "I know the rocks. That doesn't make it safe." "I know," she said softly. Ranger placed his muzzle against her knee. June lowered one hand and touched the silver fur around his nose. The dog closed his eyes. Noah watched, caught off guard by the trust between them. Ranger had accepted care from Noah, tolerated Martha, ignored most of town, and judged Silas Boone from beneath half-lowered eyelids. But with June, he became something else entirely. Softer, patient. As if he recognized a language, spoken in pauses. June looked past Noah into the clearing. "He comes here sometimes." Noah's attention sharpened. "You've seen him?" She nodded. "Not a lot. I don't follow him usually. Grandma says the woods are where people go when they want trouble to have better scenery." A quick flicker of humor crossed her face. Shy and bright, but Ranger never looks lost. Noah almost smiled. "No, he doesn't." June stepped closer, still stroking the dog's head. "Was there a house?" "A cabin," Noah said. "A long time ago. Maybe someone helped her." The words sat between them. Noah studied the girl. "Who told you about Emma?" June's cheeks pinked. "Everybody knows. They just don't talk about it when they think kids hear. That means we hear it better." That was fair enough to be irritating. Noah returned to the foundation. June stayed near Ranger, but her eyes followed every movement. Together, in a silence broken by dripping branches and the occasional indignant bird, they searched the edges of the old cabin site. Noah found more fragments: a bent spoon, a rusted nail, a strip of cloth caught beneath a stone. June, smaller and closer to the ground, noticed what he missed. Near the base of what might once have been a wall, she pointed to a flat board wedged beneath leaves and mud. "There," she said. Noah crouched and worked it free carefully. The board was damp, but not fully rotten, protected beneath a fallen beam. Something was stuck to the underside, folded and sealed by years of grime. Noah peeled it loose with slow fingers. It was paper, thick and brittle, perhaps from a child's sketchbook. The edges had darkened. One corner tore, despite his care. June knelt beside him. Ranger moved close now, finally stepping just inside the clearing. His ears had gone still. Noah opened the paper. The drawing was crude, made in faded pencil and what might have once been colored crayon. A tall man stood beside a small girl. The man had long arms and a crooked smile, drawn with awkward care. The girl wore a dress shaped like a triangle and had brown hair stretching out in wild lines. Beside them stood a dog with one ear pointed and one ear bent slightly at the tip. Ranger. Noah felt his throat tighten. Beneath the figures, written in uneven childlike letters, were the words, "Dad will come back when the rain stops." June read it slowly, barely above a whisper. Her stutter did not touch the sentence, as if the sadness of it made room for her voice. Ranger lowered himself to the wet earth and rested his chin on his paws. He did not whine. He did not move. His amber eyes stayed on the drawing. Noah looked at the paper, then at the ruined foundation, then at the woods beyond. The story Gray Pine had buried was no longer just about a missing truck in a flood. Someone had brought Emma here. Someone had kept her alive, at least long enough for a child to draw hope on paper. And Ranger, loyal old Ranger, had remembered the way back when every human being had chosen the easier road of believing there was nothing left to find. For the first time in 13 years, Emma Hale was not only a tragedy, she was a trail. By the next morning, the drawing had dried flat beneath 2 heavy books on Noah Carter's kitchen table, though nothing about it felt harmless enough to belong under books. The paper was brittle and stained, its edges curled like old leaves, but the childish figures remained clear. The tall man, the little girl, the German shepherd, with one proud ear and one bent ear, and beneath them, the uneven promise that kept returning to Noah, no matter how many times he looked away. Dad will come back when the rain stops. Outside the cabin, the lake lay under a pale winter sky, smooth and gray as hammered tin. The first thin snow of the season drifted over the porch rails, not yet serious, only testing the town like a shy actor before the curtain rose. Ranger slept beside the wood stove, his wounded forelegs stretched forward, his muzzle silver in the firelight. Every so often, the old dog's paws twitched, and Noah wondered whether dogs dreamed of places they had lost or only of the people they had failed to bring home. Noah did not like believing too quickly. Belief was a dangerous tool. In war, a man who believed the wrong road was safe could lose half a team before sunrise. In grief, a man who believed too soon could build a whole cathedral out of smoke. Still, the facts had begun arranging themselves with a stubbornness he could not ignore. Ranger had returned from the flood weeks after everyone assumed Emma was gone. Silas Boone had seen the dog dragging a child's shirt from the woods. The ruined cabin foundation showed signs of life. And now there was a drawing made by a child who had still expected her father to come back after the rain stopped. Emma Hale had not simply vanished into the river. At some point after the flood, she had been alive in those woods. Noah drove to town with the drawing sealed inside a plastic folder, and Ranger, riding in the passenger seat this time, because the dog had made it plain that the truck bed was for amateurs and firewood. Gray Pine moved slowly beneath the cold morning. Smoke rose from chimneys. A postal worker in a wool cap wrestled with a mailbox frozen shut. 2 elderly men outside the hardware store argued about whether snow before Thanksgiving meant a hard winter or a mayor with poor leadership. The town had a talent for turning weather into politics. Martha Bell was alone in the diner when Noah entered, wiping down the counter with the expression of a woman polishing not for cleanliness, but for the right to think. She looked smaller than usual in the empty room, her white curls tucked under a faded blue scarf, her round face drawn with a tiredness that made her age more visible. Ranger went straight to the radiator. Martha watched him settle, then noticed the folder under Noah's arm. "You found something," she said. Noah placed the drawing on the counter without a word. Martha did not touch it at first. She leaned over it, eyes moving across the figures. Then the words. Her mouth tightened. The color left her cheeks slowly, as if memory had reached up from the paper and taken it. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. "You ever see this before?" "No." Her voice was thin. "But that handwriting. Emma used to write her E's backward when she was tired." Claire joked. The letters were trying to run home. Noah watched her. "There's more you haven't told me." Martha looked toward the windows. Beyond the glass, the street was quiet, brushed with white. I told myself it was nothing. That usually means it was something. She let out a small laugh without humor. "You ever notice how men who barely talk suddenly become philosophers when cornering an old woman?" Martha. Her hands flattened on the counter. They were strong hands, reddened from heat and dishwater, hands that had fed half the town and slapped sense into the other half. 7 years ago, she said. Maybe 8. I came in before dawn to start pies. It was late fall, colder than this. I looked out that window and saw a young woman standing across the street near the laundromat. Noah said nothing. She was thin. Too thin. Long brown hair, tangled some, hanging down from beneath a knit cap. She wore a man's coat that swallowed her up, and she stood there looking at the diner like she knew it. Martha swallowed. Not like a stranger deciding where to eat, like someone looking at a place from a dream. "What did you do?" I opened the door. Shame passed over Martha's face. I called out, asked if she needed help. She looked right at me, big brown eyes, Claire's eyes. Martha blinked hard. Then she ran. "You followed?" I was 70 years old and wearing kitchen shoes on ice. I made it 3 steps and nearly met my lord face first. A dry little smile came and went. By the time I got around the corner, she was gone. "You thought it was Emma." "I thought grief had finally chewed a hole in my good sense," Martha said. "People see what they want when they've lost enough." I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That a dead girl came by before breakfast and declined pancakes? Noah looked down at the drawing. Maybe she was checking if the town had changed, or if anyone remembered her. Martha's eyes glistened. "And I did. That's the awful part. I did remember. I just didn't trust myself enough to say it out loud." The bell over the door chimed, and June Whitaker stepped inside with snow flecking her yellow hat. Her grandmother Lottie followed close behind, a tall, wiry woman in her late 60s with a narrow face, sharp cheekbones, and silver hair braided so tightly it looked like discipline made visible. Lottie wore an old brown wool coat patched at the elbows, and her pale green eyes took in the room with immediate suspicion. Life had made her careful. Raising June alone had made her fierce. She loved the girl like a locked gate, loved the house behind it. "I found out," Lottie said, pointing one gloved finger at Noah before the door had even closed. "My granddaughter crossed the river yesterday." June lowered her eyes. "Grandma." "No, ma'am. Do not grandma me in public. Save that sweetness for when you have not shortened my life by 10 years. Lottie turned back to Noah. "And you are large enough to frighten bears and old enough to know better. Why was a child in those woods?" Noah accepted the accusation because parts of it were deserved. "She followed me. I didn't know until we were already there." Lottie's mouth tightened. "That does not comfort me." It shouldn't. That answer seemed to annoy her by being reasonable. Ranger rose from the radiator and limped toward June. The girl knelt at once, pressing her forehead gently to his. Her stutter often caught when adults stared, but with Ranger, her words loosened. "You found something, didn't you?" She whispered to him. Martha exchanged a glance with Noah. Lottie saw it. "What did you find?" she demanded. Noah showed them the drawing. June read the words silently. Lottie's hard expression shifted, not softening exactly, but cracking where grief could be seen beneath. "That poor child," she said. Noah folded the paper carefully. "I'm going back." "Not with June," Lottie said. "No," Noah agreed. "Not with June." June looked up quickly. "But Ranger trusts me, and that's why you're staying alive enough for him to keep doing it," Lottie said. For the rest of that day, Noah searched alone with Ranger. They returned to the old cabin foundation and widened the circle, moving slowly through brush, following what might have been old footpaths or deer trails or wishful thinking. Ranger behaved differently now. He did not merely lead. He checked. He stopped at certain trees, smelled the ground, lifted his head into the wind, then moved on with growing agitation. Noah found scraps of evidence too small to satisfy anyone official. A rusted kettle wedged beneath roots, a strip of blanket caught in a thorn bush, the collapsed remains of a storage shed farther uphill. The deeper they went, the more convinced he became that someone had survived here, not for a night, but for years. By late afternoon, the weather turned. The sky darkened with unnatural speed, rolling down from the mountains in heavy banks of bruised cloud. Snow began as a dusting, then thickened into hard, slanting flakes. Noah should have turned back sooner. He knew that. The old part of him, the disciplined part, had been saying it for 20 minutes. But Ranger had grown restless, pacing ahead, circling back, whining low in his throat. The dog's urgency infected the air. "Ranger," Noah called. "We go back now." The German shepherd stopped on a ridge above a narrow ravine. His body went still, his ears lifted. Snow gathered along his back. Noah felt the world narrow. Then Ranger bolted. "Ranger!" The dog plunged between the trees, faster than Noah had seen him move since this began. Noah cursed and followed, branches whipping his coat, snow blinding him in bursts. The forest tilted downward. His boots slid on hidden roots. Once he struck his shoulder against a trunk, and pain flashed white through his arm. Still, Ranger's dark shape flickered ahead, there and gone, like a memory refusing burial. The storm thickened until the trees became shadows inside shadows. Noah's breath burned. Old fear rose with the cold, not fear of the woods, but fear of losing the one thing he was meant to follow. He had lost men in smoke and dust before. He had learned the terrible silence that came after a voice stopped answering. Not again, he thought, though he did not know whether he meant Ranger, Emma, or some younger version of himself, still trapped in another country under another sky. Then Ranger stopped. Noah stumbled into a small clearing and froze. Ahead, tucked against the shoulder of the mountain, stood a cabin. Not ruins this time, a real cabin, narrow and weather-beaten, with rough pine walls darkened by years of snow and rain. Its roof sagged under fresh white weight. A thin stovepipe leaned from one end, breathing a faint thread of smoke into the storm. And from a single small window, half covered by frost and a patched curtain, came a weak amber light. Ranger stood before the cabin steps, trembling, not from cold, from recognition. Noah's hand tightened around the flashlight. The snow fell between him and the window like a veil. Somewhere inside that lonely cabin, someone was awake. The cabin did not look like the kind of place that invited knocking. It crouched against the mountain as if the storm had been pushing on it for years, and the little structure had simply decided to endure out of stubbornness. Snow struck the roof in slanted white sheets, sliding down over warped shingles and gathering in the cracks of the porch steps. The amber light inside the window trembled, weak but living, and the thin line of smoke rising from the stovepipe told Noah Carter something his eyes were still reluctant to believe. Someone was inside. Ranger stood at the foot of the steps, with his head low and his whole body shaking. The old German shepherd did not bark. He did not scratch at the door. He only stared, his amber eyes fixed on the wooden frame, as if time itself stood behind it, waiting to decide whether mercy would be granted or withheld. Noah lifted one hand slowly. "Ranger," he whispered, though the wind took most of the word. The dog's ears moved, but he did not turn. Noah stepped closer to the porch, every instinct in him counting details. One window, one door, no fresh tire tracks, a stack of chopped wood beneath a canvas sheet, a snare line hanging from a nail, a pair of boots by the threshold, small but worn hard. Whoever lived here did not live carelessly. Whoever lived here knew winter, distance, hunger, and the value of silence. Noah raised his knuckles and knocked twice. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then something shifted inside. A chair leg scraped against the floor. A shadow crossed the window. Noah heard the unmistakable sound of metal being lifted. Not a gun, exactly, but something heavy enough to make a man reconsider his posture. The door opened only a few inches. A young woman stood in the gap, one hand gripping a short-handled wood axe. She was slight, almost narrow, but not fragile. Her strength was the kind built from years of carrying water, splitting kindling, and sleeping lightly. She looked about 21, with long brown hair braided over one shoulder, though loose strands clung to her cheeks from the damp air. Her face was pale beneath windburn, her cheekbones sharp, her lips cracked by cold. But her eyes stopped Noah where he stood. They were large, brown, and startled by more than fear. They were Martha's memory made living. Claire Hale's eyes, if Martha had been right. Emma's eyes, if the impossible had chosen to remain alive. "Stay where you are," the young woman said. Her voice was rough from disuse, low and guarded. Noah lifted both hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." That is usually what people say before deciding whether they mean it. Despite the storm, despite everything, Noah almost smiled. Fair. Then Ranger made a sound. Not a bark, not a whine. Something older and deeper. A broken little breath pulled from the bottom of him. The woman's eyes dropped to the dog. The axe slipped in her grip. For one long second, her face emptied of defense. The years fell away from it, and Noah saw not the woman in the doorway, but a child recognizing the only piece of her past that had never learned to lie. "Ranger?" she whispered. The dog climbed the porch steps with aching slowness. The woman dropped the axe. It hit the floor with a dull thud as she fell to her knees in the doorway, both hands flying to Ranger's face. He pressed into her so hard she almost toppled backward, her fingers buried in the silvered fur at his neck. She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and entirely human. "You came back," she breathed. "You old, impossible fool. You came back again." Noah stood in the snow, suddenly aware that he was witnessing a reunion too sacred for interruption. Ranger licked her chin once, then rested his forehead against hers. The young woman closed her eyes. Snow gathered on Noah's shoulders. The storm roared around the cabin, but the doorway had become a small island of warmth and grief. At last, she looked up at him. Suspicion returned, but thinner now. "Who are you?" "Noah Carter. I live near Grapevine." At the town's name, her body stiffened. "I found the old cabin foundation," Noah said, "and a drawing." Her face changed. He reached into his coat slowly and pulled out the plastic folder. "I think you made it." She did not take it at first. When she finally did, her fingers trembled. She opened the folder and stared at the drawing, the man, the girl, the dog, the sentence written by a child who still believed rain had endings that brought fathers home. Her mouth pressed tight, but tears slid down anyway, quiet and uninvited. "My name was Emma Hale," she said, after a long silence. "Was?" She looked toward the fire inside. "For a long time, I didn't know what my name was at all." She let Noah in because Ranger refused to move from her side, and because the storm had grown too dangerous for pretending doors could keep the past out. The cabin was small, but orderly. There were shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, beans, and preserved berries. A cast-iron stove warmed the room. Pelts and patched blankets hung along the walls to block drafts. Everything had been repaired more than once. Nothing was pretty, but everything had survived. Like her, she gave Noah a tin cup of bitter tea, then sat across from him with Ranger's head in her lap. She touched the old dog constantly, as if afraid he would vanish if her hand left him too long. "I remember rain," she began. "Not everything, not clearly. I remember my father shouting. I remember being angry. I remember Ranger in the back seat, whining. Then water, a sound like the whole world breaking. I remember my father reaching for me." Her voice tightened. "Then I remember seeing him outside the truck. The current took him. At least, that is what I thought." Noah did not interrupt. Men had ruined too many confessions by rushing to rescue them. "I got out somehow. Or, Ranger pulled me. I don't know anymore. I was 8. I was bleeding from here." She touched the side of her head, where a thin, pale scar disappeared into her hairline. "I ran because Ranger ran. I followed him until I couldn't. A couple found me near the ravine. Abel and Ruth Whitcomb." She glanced toward an old photograph tucked into the shelf beside the stove. In it stood an elderly couple. Abel Whitcomb, tall and bony, with a white beard down to his chest and eyes crinkled from a life of hard weather. Ruth Whitcomb, short and broad-shouldered, with dark gray hair pinned beneath a kerchief, and the calm, unsmiling face of a woman who did not waste words because she had learned actions were more reliable. They lived up here long before the bridge fell. Abel trapped. Ruth knew plants, wounds, births, fevers, everything the town forgot people used to know. They took me in. Why didn't they bring you back? Emma's expression hardened, not with anger at Noah, but with old confusion. They tried, I think. At first, I had a fever for weeks. I didn't know my name. I screamed. Whenever they tried to take me near the river, Ruth said my mind folded itself shut to keep me alive. She stared at the fire. By the time I remembered pieces, I remembered my father being taken by the water. I remembered people saying children without parents were sent away. Foster homes, institutions. I had already lost one world. I couldn't bear losing another. Noah looked around the cabin. So you stayed. I stayed. Abel died when I was 15. Ruth, 3 winters later. After that, she gave a faint, humorless smile. The woods do not ask for paperwork. They ask if you can chop wood before dark. Ranger sighed in her lap, old bones settling. You came to town once, Noah said. Emma's eyes lifted sharply. Martha saw you. A blush of shame crossed her thin face. I wanted to see if anyone remembered me. Then I saw the diner. I saw the street. I panicked. I thought if I walked in, they would take everything from me. My name, my cabin, Ranger, the life I understood. Her fingers tightened in Ranger's fur. Cowardly. Maybe. No, Noah said. Afraid. She studied him then, really studied him. You know the difference? Some days, something passed between them. Not trust. Not yet. But recognition. 2 survivors facing each other across a little stove while the storm tried to bury the mountain. Noah did not tell her that he woke at night, hearing voices of men who were not there. He did not tell her that he had spent years mistaking isolation for discipline. He did not need to. Emma seemed to understand that some people were not rescued from disaster. They simply learned to build rooms inside it. Ranger found you again? Noah asked. Always. Her eyes softened. Not every day. Sometimes weeks would pass. I thought he had chosen the town because he needed food or warmth. Then he would appear at the door, muddy, exhausted, proud as a king who had conquered absolutely nothing. Ruth used to call him Saint Fool. Noah smiled faintly. Accurate. But he never stayed, Emma said. The words changed the room. Noah leaned forward. What do you mean? Emma looked down at Ranger, and grief settled over her face in a new shape. All these years, Ranger never truly lived with me. He visited. He watched over me. He would sleep by the stove, eat what I gave him, follow me for a day or two. Then one morning, he would be gone. She swallowed. Every few weeks, sometimes every few days in spring, he disappeared. I tried following once, but he crossed the river where I couldn't. He always came back from the direction of the old road. Noah felt the hairs rise along his arms. Emma's voice dropped. I thought he was going back to the place where my father died. I thought he missed him. She looked at Noah, fear and hope struggling in her eyes. But now I wonder if Ranger was not mourning someone at all. The old German shepherd lifted his head as if hearing his name inside a truth. Emma whispered, Maybe he has been looking for someone. Outside, the storm pressed against the cabin walls. Inside, Noah stared at the dog who had kept crossing years, rivers, roads, and grief, with no explanation anyone had bothered to understand. And for the first time, the question was no longer whether Emma Hale had survived. It was who Ranger had been trying to find after all these years. Morning broke cold and colorless over the mountain cabin, as if the storm had washed all warmth from the world and left only white silence behind. Snow clung to the pine branches in heavy sleeves, and the narrow window beside Emma Hale's stove glowed faintly with the gray light of a day that had not yet decided whether it wished to begin. Noah Carter had slept in a chair near the door, though sleep was too generous a word for what he had done. He had closed his eyes, listened to the cabin creak, listened to Ranger's breathing beside the stove, listened to Emma move quietly through the small room, as if making sound might offend the past. By dawn, one thought had become a stone in his chest. If Thomas Hale had died in the flood, why had Ranger never stopped searching? Emma made coffee in a dented pot that looked old enough to have voted in several elections. She moved with the efficient caution of someone raised by winter. No wasted steps, no dramatic sighs, no complaint that did not also come with a solution. In the morning light, she seemed younger than she had the night before, but also older in stranger ways. Her brown braid hung over one shoulder. A knitted sweater, patched at both elbows, made her appear even narrower, though her hands were strong from years of axe handles, water buckets, and stubborn survival. Ranger lay near her boots, with the devotion of a knight who had misplaced his armor, but not his oath. Noah stood by the window, looking toward the buried trail. "Emma," he said carefully, "did Ranger ever bring anything back from the road?" She looked up from the stove. "What do you mean?" "Something that wasn't yours. A glove, a scrap of cloth, anything that might have belonged to your father." Emma's face tightened. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups before answering, as if the act gave her hands permission not to tremble. "Once, years ago, he came back with a leather strap. Part of a watch, maybe. I didn't know. I threw it away after a while." "Why?" "Because I hated it." The honesty came sharp and immediate. Then her voice softened. "I thought it was from the night he died. I thought Ranger kept digging through the past like an old wound." Noah accepted the cup she handed him. The coffee tasted like smoke, metal, and a warning. Maybe he wasn't digging through the past. Emma's eyes held his. "You think my father lived. I think Ranger does." The words settled between them with all the gentleness of a dropped axe. Emma turned away first. She stood, with one hand braced on the edge of the stove, staring into the red coals. When she spoke, her voice was smaller. "Do not make that easy to believe. I'm not trying to. If he lived—" She stopped, her fingers curled until her knuckles whitened. "If he lived, then why did he never come back?" Noah had no answer that would not sound cruel. Outside, a small avalanche of snow slipped from the roof and thumped to the ground. Ranger lifted his head, then lowered it again. Emma looked at Noah, and the guarded woman from the doorway disappeared for a moment. In her place stood the 8-year-old girl from the drawing, still waiting for rain to stop. "That is worse than death," she said. "Do you understand? If he died, then he was taken. If he lived and stayed away, then he chose it." Noah looked down into his coffee. There it was, the question that had followed him home from war in different clothing. Why do the living disappear? Why do men walk away from voices that still call their names? Why does survival sometimes make cowards of people who had once been brave? He thought of the men from his old team, whose families had invited him to barbecues after the funerals. He had declined, most of them. He told himself he was sparing them. In truth, he had not wanted to sit beneath summer lights, with children laughing nearby, carrying stories of fathers who had not returned. He had vanished politely, professionally, honorably even, which was the most dangerous kind of cowardice because people often mistook it for restraint. "I understand more than I want to," he said. Emma watched him for a long moment, then nodded once. Not forgiveness, not trust, recognition. Noah left the cabin before noon, promising to return when the roads cleared. Ranger wanted to follow, but Emma placed both hands on the old dog's shoulders and whispered something Noah could not hear. Ranger obeyed, though unhappily, sinking back near the stove with the expression of a general forced into retirement by fools. Noah drove slowly down from the mountain, snow chains grinding over ice, his mind already moving through the practical steps: records, rescue logs, county hospitals, River maps. If Thomas had survived, someone had seen him. Bodies vanished. Injured men left marks. In Grapevine, Martha Bell nearly dropped a tray when Noah walked into the diner after being gone through the storm. Her relief came out as anger, because Martha had never trusted tenderness unless it wore boots. You look like something the mountain chewed and rejected. Good to see you too. Do not get charming. It alarms me. She studied his face. You found her. Noah did not answer immediately. The diner was half full. 2 loggers at the counter. The postman thawing his hands around coffee. Lottie Whitaker cutting toast into precise squares while June sat beside her, eyes lifting the moment Ranger failed to appear with Noah. Martha saw enough in Noah's silence and went pale. She's alive, Noah said quietly. Martha gripped the counter. June covered her mouth. Lottie closed her eyes as if receiving news from a church bell. Noah kept the details spare. Emma was safe. Emma was frightened. Emma needed time. No one was to go running into the woods with casseroles, questions, apologies, or the town's usual talent for turning concern into a parade. Martha nodded through tears and then immediately threatened to poison anyone who ignored that instruction. It was one of her more loving speeches. By afternoon, Noah sat in the back room of the sheriff's office across from Deputy Ellen Price, a woman in her early 40s with copper-red hair pinned into a severe knot, brown skin freckled across the nose, and a calm, measuring gaze that suggested she had learned early how to make men regret underestimating her. Ellen had grown up in Grapevine, left for the state police, and returned after her father's stroke. She wore the badge without swagger. Her seriousness came not from lack of humor, but from a deep dislike of preventable messes. You want rescue records from 13 years ago, she said, and hospital admissions along the river after the flood. That is not a small ask. I brought coffee. She looked at the paper cup he had placed on her desk. Bribery with diner coffee is legally complicated. Morally sound, though. A reluctant smile touched her mouth, then vanished. Why? Noah held her gaze. Because Emma Hale is alive. Ellen did not speak for several seconds. When she did, her voice had lost its official distance. You are sure? Yes. She leaned back, absorbing it. Then Thomas? That's what I need to know. Ellen opened the old archive system, muttering about outdated software, county mergers, and how every government database seemed designed by a man who hated sunlight. For hours, they dug through scanned incident forms, water rescue logs, ambulance calls, and hospital transfers. Most led nowhere. False reports, unidentified debris, missing livestock. One farmer had apparently reported a piano floating downriver, which Ellen claimed was impossible until Noah said, "In a flood, even pride floats." She gave him a look that said he was not as funny as Martha had probably told him. Near dusk, Ellen found it. The report came from Fremont County, nearly 70 miles downstream. A male adult, unidentified, found unconscious near a flooded gravel bar the morning after the bridge collapse. Severe hypothermia, broken ribs, head trauma, lacerations on both hands. Estimated age, late 30s to early 40s. Sandy brown hair, gray eyes, mustache. No identification. The man regained consciousness 3 days later, became agitated, repeatedly asked for M or Emma, and left the rural clinic before formal discharge. Noah read the report twice. Ellen whispered, "That could be Thomas." "That is Thomas. There's no confirmation." Noah tapped the line about Emma. "There is. The trail from there was thin, but not gone." Ellen found a charity clinic note from 2 towns west, 6 months later. Man using the name. Tom Rivers. Scars on hands. Chronic pain. No permanent address. Then an old citation for sleeping behind a feed store in Idaho. Then nothing for years. Noah took the names, dates, and towns, and followed them over the next 2 days with the persistence of a man who had once tracked enemies through worse terrain than paperwork. He called shelters, clinics, county clerks, and one retired nurse who spent 15 minutes describing her grandson's disappointing haircut before admitting she remembered a quiet man with gray eyes who fixed a broken furnace and refused payment. At last, the trail ended across the state line in a forgotten trailer settlement outside Salmon Creek, a poor strip of land between a shuttered sawmill and a frozen irrigation ditch. Noah drove there, under a low sky, the color of dirty wool. The settlement consisted of aging trailers, patched roofs, rusted propane tanks, and yards full of objects too useful to throw away and too broken to use. A three-legged yellow dog watched Noah from beneath a truck and decided he was not worth barking at. An old woman in a plaid coat pointed him toward the last trailer. "Quiet one lives there," she said. "Fixes things. Keeps to himself. Doesn't drink no more, if that's what you're asking. Looks like a man who lost an argument with God and never requested a rematch." The trailer at the end was small, its white siding gone gray, its steps reinforced with mismatched boards. Noah knocked. For a long time, no one came. Then the door opened. Thomas Hale stood before him. He was older than the man in Martha's memories, older than the report, older than 50 years should have made him. He was tall, but bent, with a gaunt face, hollow cheeks, and sandy hair turned mostly white. A short, uneven beard covered his jaw. His gray eyes were bloodshot but sober, and there was a tremor in his right hand that he tried to hide by gripping the doorframe. Pain, shame, and years of bad weather had carved him down, but they had not erased him. "Noah Carter," Noah said. "I came from Grapevine." The name struck Thomas like a physical blow. His face went slack. "I need to talk to you about Emma." Thomas made a sound that barely counted as breath. His hand slid from the doorframe, and for a moment, Noah thought the man would fall. Thomas stared at him, eyes filling with a terror so old it had become part of his bones. "Emma?" he whispered. "My little girl. Is she alive?" Rain came down softly over the trailer settlement, not like the violent storm that had once torn Grapevine apart, but like a tired hand smoothing a wrinkled blanket. The sky above Salmon Creek hung low and gray, pressing its weight onto rusted roofs, broken fences, and the muddy yards where old washing machines sat like monuments to decisions nobody had time to fix. Inside Thomas Hale's trailer, the air smelled of black coffee, machine oil, and wood smoke from a small iron stove that worked harder than it looked. The place was painfully neat, not comfortable, exactly, but disciplined, in the way lonely men often make their rooms when they cannot make peace with their lives. A narrow bed stood against one wall. A cracked table sat beneath the window. On it lay a folded photograph, its edges worn soft from years of being opened and closed. Noah Carter did not need to ask who was in it. Thomas had touched it 3 times since letting him inside, each time as if checking whether memory could still be held between 2 fingers. Thomas Hale sat across from Noah, with both hands wrapped around a mug he had not drunk from. In the yellow light of the trailer, the man looked even more weathered than he had in the doorway. His sandy hair had gone mostly white, thin at the crown, and longer than he probably intended. His face was gaunt, cheeks hollowed by age and hard living, and the gray eyes Martha once described as gentle were now ringed with red and sleeplessness. The tremor in his right hand worsened whenever Emma's name entered the room. He was the kind of man people might pass at a gas station and forget immediately. Never guessing, he carried a whole ruined bridge inside him. Noah said nothing for a while. He had learned that silence sometimes opened doors, questions only bruised. At last Thomas spoke. "Tell me she is real. She is real. Not a rumor. Not someone who looks like her. Not some trick of an old man's punishment." "No," Noah said. "Emma is alive." Thomas closed his eyes. His mouth bent, as if the words had struck him somewhere too deep for sound. When he opened them again, tears had gathered, but not fallen. "Is she? Does she know me? She remembers parts. She thought you died." Thomas gave a short, broken laugh. "Good. That was kinder." "No," Noah said quietly. "It wasn't." Thomas stared at him, then looked away. Rain ticked against the thin trailer roof. Outside, the three-legged yellow dog barked once at nothing important and then lost interest, which seemed to be his governing philosophy. "I was drunk," Thomas said. The words came flat, stripped of excuses. That is where it starts. Anything I say after that does not clean it. Claire had been gone 8 months. Cancer took her slow. I watched my wife become smaller every week, and after she died, the house still smelled like her lavender soap. Emma would open Claire's closet and sit on the floor holding her dresses. I could not bear it. Could not bear my own child grieving better than I did. Noah sat still. I drank because I missed Claire. Then I drank because Emma looked at me like she was afraid I might disappear too. Then I drank because I had become the sort of father a child has to watch carefully. Thomas's jaw tightened beneath the uneven beard. That night, I went to my sister's place to bring Emma home. She didn't want to come. Smart girl. Smarter than me. We argued. I told myself I was still her father, as if fatherhood were a badge you could keep wearing after you stopped acting worthy of it. What happened on the road? Thomas stared into the mug. Rain. Ranger whining in the back seat. Emma crying but trying not to let me hear it. I remember her saying, "Daddy, please slow down." His voice broke on the word daddy. He swallowed hard. Then water across the road. More than I understood. The truck slid, hit something. I remember Ranger lunging forward. I remember Emma screaming. Then the river took us sideways. He pressed his hand to his ribs, as if the old brakes still answered the memory. I got thrown out, or pulled out, I don't know. Water does not behave like water when it wants you dead. It behaves like an animal. I saw Emma through the windshield for 1 second. Ranger was beside her. Then the truck turned. Something hit my head. After that, bits. Cold. Branches. Waking in a clinic, with strangers standing over me. I couldn't remember my own name at first, but I remembered hers. Emma. 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 They said I had been found 70 miles downstream. You left the clinic. I panicked. Thomas rubbed both hands over his face. I remembered enough to know I had put her in that truck. Enough to know I had done the one thing Claire would never forgive. I stole clothes from a donation box and walked until my feet bled. It took me weeks to get back near Grapevine. Search teams were already gone. People had started speaking in past tense. You looked for her? Thomas's eyes flashed. Not with anger at Noah, but with the desperate need to have one fact believed. Every day, for months, I slept in barns, under trees, in culverts. I crossed that river until I thought it would finish what it started. I shouted until my voice went. I found nothing. His shoulders collapsed inward. Then Ranger came back. Noah felt the room tighten around that name. He came out of the woods one morning, Thomas said. Thin, muddy, torn up, carrying one of Emma's socks. His eyes filled. I thought he had stayed with her until he couldn't. I thought he was bringing me the last thing he could. Noah remembered Silas's story. The shirt, the dog, looking back. The trail nobody followed far enough. Did you follow him? Noah asked. I tried, Thomas whispered. God help me, I tried. But Ranger crossed where the bridge had fallen. He kept going back to that road. Every time I saw him, he would stand there and look toward the woods. I thought he was grieving the place she died. I thought we were both doing the same thing, him and me, returning to the altar of what I destroyed. Thomas's voice went rough. Then one morning he was gone. Days passed. Then weeks. I decided he had died out there. And He stopped. You left. In. Thomas nodded. I could not stay where every window had known my daughter's face. I could not walk past Martha's diner and remember Emma pressing her nose to the glass for pie. I could not stand at the church and hear people call me poor Thomas when I knew the proper name was murderer. He looked at Noah. So yes, I ran. Not because I did not love her, because I loved her and believed I had killed her. Noah looked at the man across from him and saw, with a discomfort that felt almost like recognition, how guilt could make a person confuse punishment with loyalty. Thomas had not lived these 13 years. He had served a sentence no court had handed down. Noah knew that cell. He had furnished one for himself beside the lake, with clean sheets, sharpened tools, and enough silence to pass for dignity. I left people too, Noah said. Thomas looked up. After I came home. Families of men I served with. Friends. People who called because they were hurting and thought I might understand. Noah's jaw worked once. I told myself I was protecting them from what I carried. Truth is, I didn't want them to look at me and ask why I came home when better men didn't. Thomas said nothing, but something in his face changed. A wall did not fall. It cracked. Noah leaned forward. Emma is alive, Thomas. But she has lived 13 years believing you were taken by the river. She is hurt. She is angry. She is afraid to hope. You do not get to decide what she forgives. Thomas nodded slowly, tears finally slipping into the lines of his face. I know, but you can come back. But the old man laughed once, bitter and small. A man cannot come back from everything. No, Noah said. But he can stop walking away. By late morning, they were on the road. Thomas brought almost nothing. A worn coat, the old photograph, and a small wooden box containing Claire's wedding ring, Emma's baby bracelet, and a pink hair ribbon faded nearly white. He held the box in his lap as Noah drove, fingers resting on the lid. The miles passed under a sky that slowly softened. Neither man spoke much. They did not need to. Some silences were empty. Others were full of men, trying not to break before the proper time. When Gray Pine appeared in the distance, Thomas turned his face toward the window. His breathing changed. The town looked ordinary in the light rain. The diner's red door, the hardware store awning, smoke from chimneys, wet streets shining under a dull afternoon sky. To Thomas, it might as well have been a kingdom of ghosts. Not the diner, he said hoarsely when Noah slowed near town. Not yet. Noah nodded and drove past. The truck followed the old road out beyond the last mailboxes, past the field of winter grass, toward the broken bridge. Rain fell lightly now, stippling the windshield. Ahead, Hale Road appeared, empty and dark with wet asphalt, and there, in the middle of it, lay Ranger. The old German shepherd's head lifted before the truck stopped. For a moment he did not move. He stared through the rain at the windshield, ears rising, body frozen with a kind of disbelief no animal should have had to carry. Thomas saw him. The wooden box slipped from his lap onto the floor. No, Thomas breathed. No, no. Noah stopped the truck. Ranger stood, slowly at first, then with gathering certainty, the old dog stepped toward them. His limp was visible. His muzzle was silver. His body was no longer the powerful young guardian Thomas had known, but his eyes had not changed. Thomas opened the door and climbed down, as if his bones had forgotten their duties. He took 2 steps, then dropped to his knees in the mud. Ranger, he whispered. The dog came the last few feet and pressed his muzzle into Thomas's chest. Thomas folded over him, both arms wrapped around the old German shepherd, and the sound that left him was not quite a sob and not quite a prayer. Ranger leaned his full weight against him, eyes closing, tail moving once, then again, slow and weary and sure. 13 years had passed. The bridge had fallen. The child had vanished. The man had run. The town had mourned and moved on. But the dog remembered. And on that rain-softened road, Thomas Hale held the only witness who had never stopped waiting. Late afternoon returned to Gray Pine with a washed, golden light that made even the wet road look briefly forgiven. The rain had passed, leaving the pines dark and shining, the river swollen beneath the broken bridge, and the old German shepherd standing beside Thomas Hale, as if the past had tied them together with an invisible leash. Noah Carter waited a few feet away, one hand resting on the open truck door, watching Thomas keep both palms buried in Ranger's damp fur. The old man had not stopped trembling. Ranger leaned against him, with that solemn patience. Dogs seemed to learn from sorrow itself, as though he understood that humans sometimes needed to be held together before they could stand. When Thomas finally rose, Mud streaked both knees of his pants, and his face looked ruined in a new way, not by despair this time, but by the terrible arrival of hope. Noah drove them toward the mountain before Thomas could talk himself into vanishing again. Ranger lay across the back seat, head on Thomas's coat, refusing to give the man even 6 inches of emotional privacy. Thomas held the small wooden box in his lap. Inside were Claire's wedding ring, Emma's baby bracelet, and the faded pink hair ribbon. He opened the box once, then closed it quickly, as if memory might fly out and accuse him. The road climbed through the pines. Snow still clung in blue shadows beneath the trees, though the sky had cleared enough for sunlight to break across the ridges. Neither man spoke. Noah understood that silence. Some journeys did not need conversation. They needed only enough courage not to turn the truck around. Emma was splitting kindling when they arrived at the cabin. She stood near the woodpile in a gray sweater and patched canvas trousers tucked into old boots, her brown braid falling over one shoulder, her face pale from the cold and from the life she had built far from witnesses. She saw Noah first, then Ranger, and for a brief second relief softened her mouth. Then Thomas stepped out of the truck. The axe slipped from her hand and landed in the snow. No one moved. Thomas looked smaller beneath her gaze than he had looked in the trailer. He was tall, yes, but bent by shame, his white-streaked hair damp beneath his cap, his uneven beard trembling around a mouth that could not find the first word. Emma's face did not crumple into joy. It hardened. Her eyes filled, but her jaw locked, as if she had spent 13 years preparing for grief and had no idea what to do with a living man. "No," she said. Thomas took one step. "Emma." She stepped back. "No." Ranger rose slowly from the truck and walked between them, but Emma barely looked at him. Her eyes stayed on Thomas, burning with a child's abandoned fury inside a woman's guarded face. "You were dead." Thomas swallowed. "I thought you were dead," she repeated, sharper now, as if saying it could restore order to the world. "You were in the river. I saw you go under. I was found downstream. I came back. I looked. Do not," her voice cracked. "Do not come here with words that make it sound clean." Thomas stopped as if struck. Noah remained near the truck. This was not a battle he could fight for either of them. He had brought the match to the candle, but fire had its own decisions. Emma's hands clenched at her sides. "I waited. I drew pictures. I wrote that you would come back when the rain stopped. Do you know how many rains stopped?" "How?" Thomas's face collapsed. "No. Too many." Her voice shook, growing louder. "Every storm, I listened. Every spring, I watched the trail, and when I finally remembered enough to know the town existed, I was too afraid to go back, because I thought everyone I loved was gone." She laughed once, bitter and broken. "But you were alive." "I came back," Thomas whispered. "I swear to you, I came back. I searched for months." "Then why didn't you find me?" The question hung there, cruel because it was fair. Thomas opened the wooden box with shaking hands and held it out, not as proof but as surrender. "Because I was weak. Because I believed the worst. Because Ranger came back alone, and I thought he had stayed with you until the end. Because after that, every road in Grey Pine looked like the road where I killed my own child." Tears ran freely down his weathered face. "There is no answer that makes it right." Emma stared at the box. Her gaze found the pink ribbon, faded nearly white. Something passed across her face, a memory rising through anger like a small hand through water. She did not take it. Ranger lowered himself between them. Not beside Thomas, not beside Emma. Between them. The old German shepherd rested his chin on his paws, exactly as he had done on the empty road for 13 years. His body formed a quiet bridge no flood had managed to break. The sight undid what words could not. Emma covered her mouth. Thomas bowed his head. Noah felt his own throat tighten and looked away toward the trees. He thought of all the years Ranger had walked back and forth between two lost people who believed the other was gone. Not with plans, not with explanations, only with the stubborn faith of a creature who knew love as a direction and kept following it long after humans had given up reading the map. Emma finally stepped forward. She knelt on the other side of Ranger, not close enough to touch Thomas, but no longer far enough to flee. Her fingers entered Ranger's silvered fur. "I am angry," she said. Thomas nodded. "You should be. I do not know how to be your daughter. I do not know how to be worthy of being your father. That is not comforting." A cracked, helpless sound escaped Thomas. It might have been laughter if it had not hurt so much. No, I suppose not. For the first time, something almost human and almost gentle moved across Emma's face. "You always were terrible at comforting people." Thomas closed his eyes. "Your mother said the same." The mention of Claire did what apology had not. It opened a door neither of them had expected. Emma's face shifted, and suddenly she was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a grief that had waited too long for permission. Thomas did not reach for her. To his credit, he understood that forgiveness could not be grabbed like a rope. He only stayed there, kneeling in the snow, letting her see he would not run. Days became weeks after that, and nothing healed the way stories sometimes pretend. Emma did not move into town. Thomas did not become whole because he had spoken the truth. Some mornings, she refused to see him. Some evenings, they sat outside the cabin and said almost nothing, while Ranger slept between their chairs like a judge who had grown tired of court. Slowly, painfully, a pattern formed. Thomas repaired the cabin steps. Emma led him. Emma showed him where Ruth had planted herbs. Thomas listened. One afternoon, she handed him a cup of tea without being asked. He held it as if she had entrusted him with a crown. Grapine changed too, though not loudly. Martha cried the first time Emma entered the diner, then immediately insulted her for being too thin and brought out enough pie to feed a revival meeting. Deputy Ellen Price filed the corrected reports with careful dignity. Lottie Whitaker guarded June from gossip with the ferocity of a dragon in a wool coat. And June, who had watched the whole town bend under the weight of an old truth, found a small courage of her own. At the Winter Founders Festival, beneath strings of yellow lights and a sky clear enough for stars, June stood on the little wooden stage near the courthouse. She wore a blue coat, her chestnut hair tucked behind both ears, and her notebook trembling in both hands. The crowd grew quiet. Noah stood near the back beside Martha, who whispered, "If anyone laughs, I will become a legal problem." Noah believed her. June looked at Ranger, lying near the stage with his muzzle on his paws. Then she looked at Noah, at Emma, at Thomas. Her first word caught, but she waited. She did not apologize for the silence. She breathed through it. "This town," June read, voice uneven but clear, "thought an empty road meant an ending. But maybe some roads stay empty because they are waiting for people to become brave enough to walk them again." Noah felt something inside him loosen. The next week, he unlocked the old garage behind his cabin. The building had belonged to a mechanic years before, and Noah had used it mostly to store tools and avoid people with remarkable efficiency. Now he cleaned it out, painted the door, and put up a hand-lettered sign. "Repairs for veterans. Pay what you can." Martha said the sign lacked charm. Noah told her. Charm cost extra. She brought him a plant anyway, which died within 3 days, because even mercy had limits. Then, as winter leaned toward spring, Ranger began to fade. It happened quietly at first. He slept longer, climbed slower, ate with less interest, a development Martha called personally offensive. Emma brushed him every morning. Thomas rubbed the stiff joints in his hips. Noah pretended not to count the pauses between the dog's breaths. On Ranger's last afternoon, the sky turned gold above the pines. The air was cold but gentle. Without warning, the old German shepherd rose from Noah's porch, where he had been sleeping in a patch of sun, and began walking toward Hale Road. No one called him back. Noah followed first. Emma and Thomas came behind, walking side by side but not touching. The road was dry that day, shining faintly in the low light. When they reached the broken bridge, Ranger stepped to the place where he had lain for so many years. He turned once toward the woods, then toward Thomas, then Emma, then Noah. At last, he lowered himself onto the road. The wind moved through the pines, with a sound like distant waves. Thomas knelt on one side of him. Emma knelt on the other. Noah stood behind them, hand resting against his own chest, because something there ached and blessed him at the same time. Ranger did not stare into the forest anymore. He did not wait. The thing he had guarded had returned, not as it was, not whole, not untouched by sorrow, but living, present, found. The old German shepherd closed his eyes, with Emma's hand on his neck and Thomas's hand over his heart. And on the road that everyone once believed led nowhere, Ranger finally rested. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder or shining signs. Sometimes God sends them quietly through an old dog who refuses to give up, through a road everyone has forgotten, through one broken heart brave enough to follow another. Ranger's journey reminds us that love can keep walking long after people lose hope, and that even the most wounded souls may still be guided home in ways they do not understand. In our daily lives, we may all know someone standing on an empty road, waiting for forgiveness, comfort, or simply a reason to keep going. Be gentle with them. Be patient. Sometimes a small act of kindness is the miracle God chooses to place in our hands. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment about where you are watching from, and subscribe for more emotional stories of faith, love, and loyalty. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide your heart toward peace.